And hi, Andy. I see that Andy Ferrillo is here. Andy's a member of our Citizens Advisory Committee. And Andy, do let us know. And I think we have one other person listening. If you wanted to chime in and offer any comments, we of course want to give you the opportunity to do that. But at this point, I think we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And the first thing I wanted to do was, well, I'll just go ahead and, because she's about to do the roll call. For those of you who haven't met Mimi Coe, our new clerk of the board, this is Mimi. I'm very glad to have her on board. This is the first technical advisory committee since Mimi joined. So with that, Mimi, do you want to call the roll?
Yeah, so we have City of Davis.
Don't believe we have anyone.
Oh, we have Bob Clark just joined. Let me put him in. And just before we move further, I have a phone number on the attendee list. I'm not sure if that is anybody on the committee, but if you could rename yourself. But we'll go ahead. City of Davis.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Bob Clark.
Hi, Mr. Clark. City of West Sacramento.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Present, we have
Stephanie and I are both
yes.
here. City of Winters. Okay, we have absent. City of Woodland.
Brent, we can't hear you, but I see that you're talking.
Okay, he is muted. Okay, Brent is with us. We have Yolo Solano Air Quality Management District. Okay, absent. Yolo County.
Nick Burton with Yolo County.
Okay, Caltrans.
Good afternoon, Chris Hulamard.
And Unitrans.
Here.
Okay, we do have quorum.
Great, thanks, Mimi. And I see Brent is trying to call back in, so hopefully we can resolve his audio issues. It looked like the 530 number disappeared as well, so maybe he had, that may have been what was going on.
Okay.
But hopefully he can hear us. All right, so thanks everyone for being here. I think our first agenda item is to approve the TAC minutes for the meeting of December 6th. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve.
Thank you, Stephanie.
I can second.
Oh, yes.
Thanks, Jeff. All in favor? Raise your hand. Maybe you just raise your hand. Okay, looks like we have it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, great.
Okay.
That motion passes. Any objections? Okay. All right. So with that, we will go to comments from members of the public regarding matters not on the agenda. Andy sounds like he's mainly just listening in today. Is there any member of the public that wants to make a comment?
No, and we didn't have any public comments sent in either.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do updates and reports. So this is a slightly reorganized agenda from our previous one. Before we had done we did roll call and updates from members. So, but we're kind of changing around the format a bit, and this is also consistent with some changes we're making in our board and Citizens Advisory Committee as well, where we now have just this updates and reports section of the agenda. Also, there's not an executive director's report in your packet. We've moved to a system where I'm now sending out a bi-weekly email executive director report to the board and CAC and TAC. So please look for that in your inbox. And if you're not receiving that, let me know, and I'll make sure that we add you to the list. But so just a couple of quick oral report items. The first is that we relaunched some of our express services that were suspended last September due to our driver shortage. Those are our express routes serving Central Davis, West, which is the 43, and the 43R, which is the reverse direction service, the 230, which serves West Davis, and the 45, which serves Woodland. And those are all buses that go to downtown Sacramento. And so we made that switch, which started today, in part because of the improving driver situation at Unitrans, and Unitrans was able to take back some of their service. Thank you, Jeff. So we were able to shake loose some of those driver resources to relaunch those express services that have been suspended since last September. It's just currently one round trip per day, but we're hopeful, and you'll see this is when we talk about the service planning for the budget, we're hopeful we'll be able to gradually grow those over the course of the next fiscal year. So if you have folks in your communities that are we're looking to and wondering about those express services, you can let them know that they've launched. The other thing I just wanted to report on orally is that we are continuing to have conversations with Caltrans about the Yolo 80 managed lanes project. We talked, that was a subject of conversation at our last meeting. We're hoping to have some substantive updates soon. I will say our conversations with Caltrans have been constructive. Really, the focus right now is working on kind of having a project definition that everyone is satisfied with, particularly focused around whether or not we're looking at a carpool lane versus kind of a tolled lane. Obviously, not a final decision would be pending the environmental analysis and the results of the environmental analysis, but I think YCTD board is looking to make sure that express lanes are a viable option, and as part of that environmental review, as that is a kind of a preferred direction that the YCTD board wants to go. So anyway, those conversations are ongoing. And then the last item I'll note is for the city of Woodland, we have an RFP that's currently on the street for microtransit, for basically a new kind of technology platform for microtransit that will be used for the new service in Woodland. As well, it would also replace the current platform for our service to our rural communities of Knights Landing and Winters. We just extended the deadline for responses to that RFP to I believe, April 19th, because we've continued to receive so many questions from applicants, as well as Public Record Act requests that we're working to respond to. So a tremendous amount of interest in that RFP. And so we needed to extend that deadline in order to make sure we were able to answer questions and get people the information they've requested and still have time to finalize their responses. So we're excited about the tremendous interest in that, and we're hoping to launch that service later this year. So that's my oral report. I want to see if there's any questions on that, and also provide opportunity for TAC members to provide any updates that you would like to share with other members of the committee.
I have a question regarding the express service that came back for it. So for 42A and B in the West Side, did that include the change with the late, like the 30-minute layover shift that we want to make as well, or is that later?
We have not yet. Did you want to go ahead, Jose?
I was just gonna say, so our express services that we're returning don't include the 42. The 42 changes that were adopted, that's our 42 intercity. It's almost kind of like a standalone service that we operate. We don't have yet the driver resources to be able to launch that, so we are still working on that. But the express services are the ones, as Autumn mentioned, connect Woodland and Davis areas into downtown Sacramento. And I don't believe they have stops in West Sacramento right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or updates from TAC members? Okay, great. And then we do have a calendar of meetings remaining for this year. And so let's see, where is that calendar? Do we have that in here?
No, I think we were going to mention the next meeting and then suggestions for the remainder of the year, because I know we've skipped a couple of months, and I wasn't sure if TAC wanted to meet every other month or every 3 months. But we do have the next one scheduled for June 6th. And beyond that, it was going to be for discussion.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we have this meeting was postponed by a month. It was originally scheduled for March. We decided to postpone it because we wanted to bring you all the budget and have a substantive conversation on the budget for the next fiscal year, which is why we pushed it back. But yeah, so I think historically the TAC has met quarterly. And so that's 4 meetings a year, and we're happy to continue with that schedule if that's the appropriate schedule. Our Citizens Advisory Committee is now meeting bi-monthly, so that's 6 times a year. Anyway, so I think it's kind of at the TAC members' discretion. If there's a preference, we will stick with quarterly unless there's any reason you'd want to change that. Of course, we
I just agree with you, Autumn. Quarterly is fine. If something unique comes up, we can always schedule the meeting if something needs particular attention.
Absolutely. As long as we provide notice, there's no problem with scheduling a special meeting. And that's something that can be done at any time, and any member of the committee can request that, of course.
Yeah, I'll speak up in support of that quarterly schedule.
Okay. All right, well, unless there's any other thoughts on that, we'll go ahead and just calendar them out for the rest of the year. And we'll make sure this time, I know everybody did receive a Zoom invite originally, but we'll make sure you also get a calendar invite as well. And I think some of it, you know, for whatever reason, the TAC list that we inherited has 600 people on it. That's the distribution list that we have for the TAC. And so, knowing, making sure we have the reps for each city will help us make sure that we get it onto the right people's calendars. So if there's anyone else that's not here today that you want to make sure they have it physically on their calendar, please do let us know. You can email Mimi or put it in the chat, and we'll make sure that those people get the calendar invite as well, rather than all 600 people.
Autumn,
yeah.
Autumn, this is Bob. Just one question. This is a common challenge with all agencies now with electronic scheduling and kind of keeping the group list current. Are you just starting a new TAC list and gonna throw out the 600 names that were probably since the beginning of time? Or how are you cleaning this up? Because I'm always interested when I'm representing the city of Davis somewhere, I realize I'm not always the only Davis individual on the list for information, but I do like to know who from my organization is getting that information, so I know to coordinate and communicate with them internally if I'm going to be the physical representative at a TAC meeting or other meeting.
It's a great question, Bob. And I think we're certainly not going to throw out that list. You know, I think we'll certainly continue to distribute. And I think there's a fair amount of overlap between that list and another kind of 600-ish person list that we have that receives our, you know, our board packets and just kind of general information. So I think we'll continue to share the packets with the broader list, but in terms of who we would send calendar invites to, you know, and follow up with if there was a last minute scheduling change for like we did in the, you know, over the course of the last week, it would be good to know who the right people are for each jurisdiction.
I concur on that because Stephanie is our representative for the city of West Sacramento, but I'm also on this because I received the calendar invite and we, you know, had talked about whether or not I need to be on here. So for this one, yes, I'm on here, but I guess in the future, Stephanie is going to be representing. So
okay.
Would it make sense for the group to publish, you know, like either on our website or something, the current member list by jurisdiction, just so you guys know who's assigned as primary and alternate, you know, depending, you tell us, and then that way you kind of know who's assigned to it, and you can be copied on the agendas and invitations. Would that make sense? Just to kind of clear things up, and if things change, you'll be able to note that on the publicly available list and say, hey, update this, or this person's no longer there.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can chime in, we are actually working on that. Our marketing and communications specialist is working on the YCTD side of the website. So we'll get the TAC and the CAC up and running. So we'll have all that too.
I should have known Chris was on it. He's taking charge of all of that kind of communication stuff, and it's been a great asset to us.
Yeah.
So, okay, great.
He really has, and I should add, if you haven't checked out the new Yolo bus website, you should check it out. It just launched last month, and it's like our website went in a time machine from the late 90s to the to whatever we are now, the 2020s. So all thanks to our new communications and marketing specialist. So anyway, check it out. And we are going to be, so it's the Yolo bus site. You'll notice like it's a little bit light on the kind of YCTD kind of policy and administrative side. We are working on getting that. We wanted to get the Yolo bus site launched as quickly as possible, so our passengers just had a better experience for getting, the information they need about our bus service. But there is going to be the kind of more administrative side of the website we'll be launching sometime this summer, and we're just moving a bit more slowly on that piece. Great. All right. Well, if there's no other thoughts on that, then we'll get you the updated calendar of meetings. We'll make sure that everybody who's here is getting the calendar invite. And again, if you want to make any changes to who's your official representative and alternate, just Mimi is the right person to follow up to make sure we have the most current information. So with that, unless there's any other kind of questions or comments, why don't we go ahead and dive into our kind of substantive agenda? And we're a few minutes ahead of schedule, which is good news. So I'm going to turn it over to Jose, who's going to talk to us about our planned transit service levels for the 22-23 budget. And Jose, do let me know if you want me. I do have the packet up and I'm happy to share my screen if you want.
Thank you, Autumn. It may be helpful to when we get to the actual charts and stuff to have those up for the conversation. I expect that there'll be at least a couple of questions and points we can clarify. So what we're presenting again to the TAC is a preview of what's going to be informing the full draft budget that's going to be coming in a couple of weeks. At least, and this first item is primarily revolving around the planned service levels and the anticipated cost of purchased transportation and other operating expenses. So not necessarily a full budget or line items or everything as far as what is involved in the true cost of operating it for the year, but those that we are a little bit more directly in control of, like service levels and what we're anticipating in terms of the kind of ever evolving changes and impacts from COVID. So with that being said, the service levels were developed based on what we experienced in the last 2 years, 2.5 years with COVID, and impacts some of the changes and challenges we had with respect to driver resources, funding assumptions, operating assumptions, et cetera. And then kind of the ever variable kind of moving demand from employment centers or key centers in Sacramento, Davis, and our other jurisdictions that we serve. Just so that being said, what we are budgeting for the upcoming fiscal year in terms of service levels would be that expansion that was mentioned earlier of the Route 42 A and B to have 30-minute service during peak frequencies, or 30-minute frequency during peak periods during the weekday. And it does include modifying the route path primarily in the city of Davis and in downtown Sacramento to improve reliability and serve heavily used corridors in Davis. Some of the local services, there are not significant changes being planned for. The newly launched Route 37 in West Sacramento, no major changes, expansions or reductions, minor adjustments to the Route 40 and 41 there to kind of return some of the previously suspended services that were reduced during COVID to try and ensure that we don't kind of significantly impact, or I should say disproportionately impact those disadvantaged communities that are served by those routes. So I know that we had to reduce some of the service ban. That's what we're proposing, is to bring that back so that they have access to community services throughout the city beyond just the typical 8 to 5 hours. Route 240, we're maintaining its current schedule as permanent, which is really a Monday through Saturday schedule, and slight reductions in Sunday or on Sunday services. In Davis, we are budgeting to return a number of our express routes, and the Route 44 serving South Davis, we're looking to bring back some of that service. I think that's really important to note that would, again, provide some fixed route service to that Southern Davis area, especially as our Route 42 changes eliminate some of the Child's Loop that served that community. So we are recommending that we bring that back. The percentage of pre-suspension levels is a little misleading. Really what that means is that's 2 of the previously 3 trips that were operated pre-COVID. And again, really what we're saying in terms of number of trips per day that can be adjusted. We do not have a firm grasp on where the demand is going to exist as people return to the office, as people return to their employment, or employment has changed. And so, but we didn't want to, kind of hamstring our ability to provide that service budget-wise. And so that's why we're accounting for the specific number of trips overall that we're recommending as it stands today. But it's obviously going to be part of the conversation with our TAC and with our board about prioritizing them. In Woodland, we are proposing to return again additional. We started with one today of Route 45 and proposing another 2 to meet the anticipated demand. Again, returning it to about 60% of pre-suspension levels. Locally in Woodland, what we are budgeting is for the continued operation of the 2 local routes we have, the 211 and the 212, to continue for about 6 months because we do anticipate effectively eliminating those fixed routes locally in support of a transition to a microtransit service that covers the city. And so we'll be meeting our local demand in Woodland with microtransit. And then that accounts for, again, the budgeting hours and service levels for about 6 months of microtransit on or around January. We are transitioning away for now from the local Davis support on the A and the L lines and no planned expansions on the jointly operated Causeway connection. With respect to the ADA paratransit services, those really just mirror our fixed route services, both temporally and geographically. We are anticipating a slight increase in revenue hours and miles. It's all demand-based, so we don't really control that, but we have seen that demand has been increasing at a slightly faster rate than our fixed route ridership. And so we are expecting a little bit more as folks go back to more non-essential trips on those services. So they were limited, primarily for health reasons or absolutely necessary trips on the paratransit services. But it is open for any purpose and any reason. And as folks go out into the world in a post-COVID environment, we do expect a little bit increase on that as well. Microtransit service, we are proposing to continue with the Knights Landing and Winters services as they are currently scheduled, which are both 6-day-a-week services. Knights Landing and Winters are both Monday through Friday. The Knights Landing also operates on Sundays, and the Winters also operates on Saturday. We are also anticipating, again, a slight increase to about 10% of the number of trips for that same reason as folks begin to provide a couple more non-essential trips and as demand and popularity increases. The Woodland microtransit service, we are budgeting for, again, 6 months of operation on or around January. And some assumptions are being made as far as the number of vehicles per day being operated, number of hours per day, and assumptions about the effectiveness or efficiencies of that service at an average of about 4 trips per hour, 3 miles per trip, given that those trips are going to be limited to just City of Woodland boundaries. And so those are the assumptions that were used to estimate the anticipated budget. So that's a very broad overview of some of the assumptions that the planning staff made in terms of programming service levels for the coming year. Also in the staff report is a summary of the number of hours between what was budgeted in the current fiscal year and what was proposed for next year. And again, some to date, estimated costs based on annualized. Some of it is based on actual, some of it based on annualized purchase transportation costs and figures. So again, very broad overview, very interested to see what the TAC has to say as of today with respect to some of the planned service levels and changes. And we can go for there. Happy to clarify or answer any questions that the TAC may have.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jeff. I'm having trouble hearing you. Am I the only one?
No audio is coming through right now, Jeff.
And I want to make sure that Brent, so it looks like Jeff's going to call in. We'll skip you. I see that. We'll go to Bob next, but I also want to make sure Brent's audio issues have been resolved. Brent, can you hear us and can we hear you?
I can hear you for sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great.
All right, Bob, you had a hand up.
Yeah, Jose, you mentioned that with some of the South Davis service being reestablished on the one line in light of, changes to the other service line, and not knowing exactly what the demand is. What's your plan for kind of evaluating that and potentially making any adjustments to it based on actual demand?
Yeah, so currently, what the plan would be to continue monitoring performance metrics, ridership, cost per hour, rides per hour, other things like that. And then we do have opportunities roughly quarterly with our contract operations to adjust service schedules and bids. It's kind of like one of those fine lines with transit and mass transit services where you don't want to be frequently changing schedules and having people be forced to adjust their commute. It's much easier to expand if demand is realized and you have the resources to do it. But what I'm saying is we would not recommend at this point to have the service launch, evaluate it for a quarter, and then make a decision for the third quarter to say, yeah, demand's not there, within the first 3 months, so we're going to eliminate it. I mean, that's why we are budgeting for the service effectively to be operated for the full year. For those express services, to try and give it a fair shakeout. I think realistically, after 6 to 9 months of monitoring the ridership and the demand and our increased planned presence for marketing, communications, and working with our stakeholders and large employment centers, we'll have a good idea as to what the future demand is going to look like, so that we could do a good job of meeting the actual demand and adjusting as necessary for fiscal year 23-24. So I know it's difficult to say. It's also hard to say you need to or we have the option or ability to change every 6 months. That's not really fair to customers and commuters, especially if it's been suspended as long as it has been. So we will continue to monitor it and report it to our board, to our technical and citizens committee. But it's really going to be one of those things where we try to anticipate a certain level of return to work from previous demand and what we saw during the COVID environment. With this current limited return that we just launched today, that'll give us a little bit more information as well to be able to make some decisions for as early as, I'd say, September. If we notice that one route or another is much more in demand or much less in demand than others.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not advocating for any change. I just want to understand what the thought was. So it sounds like you're generally committed to giving it a year and then reassessing, which is fine.
Yeah, generally. And again, we do have some tools to make mid-year adjustments if necessary, but and our board did adopt a prioritization tool. So we have conflicting demands on resources. We can evaluate, if certain areas or populations are going to be prioritized by our board.
And I'll just add that with because all the express services have been suspended since September. I mean, they're all starting today, one trip on each one. It gives us a nice baseline to compare, and we'll see, as the months proceed, which of those services are we seeing really strong demand on. So it's kind of a nice, the pre-COVID numbers give us one source of information. The numbers during COVID give us another source of information, but everything is changing so quickly that I really think looking at where the demand comes back after today, and then really, building from there. The other thing I'll just add is that Saycog, we're currently part of an effort that Saycog is organizing to kind of keep abreast of what's happening with major employers in the region and understand how, when they're bringing their workers back. I mean, obviously the state of California being a huge piece of that, but not the only piece of that, to help inform our service planning. So we're participating in that effort. And we also, as part of a recent grant application to the state, requested funding to do a big data purchase for Yolo County, and basically looking at cell phone data to understand how people's travel behavior, what it looks like now. A lot of our services are, of course, oriented towards getting people from the central portion of Yolo County to downtown Sacramento. But anecdotally, we see with traffic patterns that with the university being back in person and housing prices being what they are, there's a lot of people coming the other way across the causeway too. And so as part, if we receive those grant funds, the idea is to purchase that data and then basically do an analysis of how we might add or change our express services to better capture where demand is now post-COVID.
Okay, thanks. Just two quick questions that With the reestablished service in South Davis, if YCTD is aware of any stop locations that need, any improvements, signage, whatever, that may no longer be there or may no longer be current, let us know at the city if there's anything we can support. And then your last comment about the big data purchase, if you do get that grant, is that data that other members here could avail themselves to? Because that would be a great source of kind of that quote unquote big data for a variety of local needs.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can certainly make that available to you for sure. Yep.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I appreciate that generous offer, Bob. Hopefully our other member jurisdictions are going to match that and allow us to, let you know where we could have some support in updating any signage as needed.
Jeff, I saw your question in the chat about whether or not there's any projected or dates for the 42 expansion. At this point, we don't have a date. I mean, I think, as you're aware, some of this is about, we're continuing to provide some support for Unitrans through the end of this spring quarter. We're continuing to do that, to run the A line. We hope, we're cautiously optimistic that once we get those drivers back, if present trends in hiring and retention continue, that we'll be able to launch it this summer. We do have some staffing changes that are kind of happening that may impact our ability to roll that out. But our hope is, that it would happen before the fall. And that's what our budget reflects. I think our budget reflects that we're doing it as soon as like July 1, just to give ourselves the ability. Should we be able to roll it out that quickly and have the confidence that we have the drivers, then that's our hope. All right, are there other questions or comments? I see, Nick, your comment in the chat. Thank you. Yes, I think we're going to have a lot of work to do to update our signage in the near future. So appreciate your help with that. Okay, if there's no other questions on this, then I'm going to stop sharing. Stop sharing that, and we'll thank Jose for the presentation and go to our next agenda item, which is to talk about the budget work in progress. And I will go ahead and share my screen for this piece. Let's see, I believe it's this one here. Let's see if I get it right. Yeah. All right. Are you all seeing that, an Excel spreadsheet? Okay, great. This should largely match the one that went out in your packet, with one exception, which is, I'm scrolling down, for our microtransit operating expenses, that we had the wrong numbers for the approved budget from last year. So the budget years, the numbers for this current, the coming fiscal year are unchanged. But so we previously had a total that that we had budgeted $932,000 for the last fiscal year. That was about $200,000 too high. And so as a result, it was showing that our microtransit operating expenses were going down by about $145,000, when in fact they're going up by about $51,000. So I didn't send around a corrected version. Again, this is a work in progress, so I apologize. But just wanted to make you all aware of that correction. So anyway, going back up to the top. So this budget is a work in progress. In years past, YCTD has eventually sent you all a draft. You have 15 days to review it, and then it goes to the board. Our process this year is a little bit different. We wanted to share some of our key assumptions with you now around, again, like our service, our operating expenses, and our LTF TDA allocations, because I know that that's a really important piece for you all as you're putting together your budgets for the next fiscal year. So we figured the sooner we could at least bring you our initial assumptions about that, the better. And especially, this is my first year as executive director. I'm not aware of where all the landmines are. So wanted to make sure we had a chance to have that conversation. And then our next step is to actually then get out a draft budget for you all for that 15-day review period. Then our board will have a preliminary look at it in May, give us any feedback, and then we'll hopefully adopt the final budget in June. So that's our process going forward. So we're really very much at the very beginning of this process. Again, wanted to bring you in on the ground floor so that we, are hearing from you and flagging any issues as early as possible. So this is obviously not a complete budget. It's just operating expenses. It's not the complete revenue picture. We're frankly still getting our arms around the complete revenue picture with all of the things that have been happening with recovery funds and CARES Act, and then the new IIJA is changing all of the transit allocations for 5307 and 5311 funding, as well as we're still kind of sifting through and trying to fully understand the cash that we currently have in the bank and understanding what's restricted, what's unrestricted, what's set aside for various pots of funding. So that piece we're working on, but we'll again wanted to bring you the portions of the budget that we feel pretty confident about. Similarly, there's no the capital budget. This is just operating. It's not capital. YCTD does not currently have a capital improvement plan. We need one. And so we're essentially treating this year's capital improvements budget. We're focusing on a couple of the kind of immediate obvious things that we need. But we need a capital improvement plan to really actually be thoughtful about what all our needs are. So that's why you're not seeing a capital budget here today. There will be a capital budget, but it's really going to be focused on just very near-term things that we know we absolutely need to do this year, and then some placeholder assumptions as we then move towards getting a capital improvement plan in place to really map out the next 10 years of investment needs. So I appreciate your patience and forbearance with me as I'm trying to get my arms around the full financial picture of YCTD. It's very much a work in progress. So with that said, I'll just kind of walk through the categories we have here, and then we'll talk about the LTF and TDA allocations. So for our labor and benefits, we've got about a 9% increase in our overall labor and benefits for the year, and there's actually a reduction in benefits and an increase in labor. We did a salary adjustment, a salary comp survey and equity adjustments for the first time in, as far as anyone knows, a very long time at YCTD, and brought a bunch of the staff up to at least the bottom of the comparable range, because most of our staff were below the range of comps that most of our member agencies pay. And then we've also, our new personnel policies that were adopted in December allow for both a cost of living increase and a merit pay adjustment annually. So those have been built in here. So really trying to bring our staff back up to, back up to a reasonable, competitive, I would say, salary and benefits package, so that we can, continue to retain and attract staff, which has been no small challenge in this current environment. Then scrolling down, you'll see that, so these are our additional administrative expenses. Overall, our administrative expenses are flat. There's actually a slight reduction of about a $430,000 reduction in our admin expenses compared to last year. A big piece of that is, for some reason, we had engine retrofits that were this vehicle maintenance piece we had here that was for some reason in our administrative budget rather than our fixed route budget. So we took that piece out. And then the rest of this was reduced based on our actual spending this year. Because last year was the first year we actually had an administrative budget that was separate from fixed route. Previously, it was all lumped together. So I think there was a lot of kind of assumptions as we were trying to parse those, as the team was parsing those out last year. So this, really reflects us saying, okay, we've now been through about almost a year, and we now have a better sense of what some of our administrative costs are. So that's administrative expenses, and please feel free to jump in at any point with questions as I go through this. On the fixed route side, our expenses have gone up by about $650,000, and that's really due to the wage increase that our board passed in response to the driver shortage. So this is about the estimate that we had for how much it would cost. And that it works out well, because our service plan for this year is not actually radically different than the service plan for last year, right? I mean, we were planning to roll out some of these things like the 42 expansion last year, and just were not able to because of the driver shortage. So that's where we really see an important change. One thing I will note is that for electric vehicle charging, the Causeway connection, I think our budgets for that and for fuel, I think, were quite conservative, and we've seen some savings there. Now, obviously, the fuel situation is given what's happening and with global events is uncertain. But we did still build in a fairly comfortable cushion for, a run up in a continued run up in fuel prices if need be. It's just that last year's assumptions were even more conservative. And so that's what you see here. On the paratransit operating expenses, as Jose mentioned, this really just largely mirrors our fixed route operating expenses, and it's not fixed, but this is again based on our actuals for this year. We see last year's budget was a bit high, and so we've reduced it. And then for microtransit, again, apologies for the change from what was in your packet. We do anticipate microtransit going up this year. Again, last year's budget also included the rollout of microtransit in Woodland, which was delayed. And so not a real significant change there. Again, fuel costs, we had very conservative assumptions around fuel costs last year. So that is that. And then we have a new program this year. Oh, and I will just say last year, paratransit and microtransit were lumped together. So this is the first year we've actually separated them out. And we thought that was important as our microtransit grows to be able to really understand how microtransit is is performing relative to paratransit. So that is also a change from last year's budget. And then lastly, we have a new program, which is multimodal operating expenses. And this is all about the two big grants we got this year, the $86 million infra grant for the Yolo 80 managed lanes, and then the $1.2 million raise grant for the active transportation or intercity trails project, as we're calling it. So we have the labor for that program. This is really the new position that we've created along with some kind of interns and whatnot. And I should say the labor is all included in our administrative budget, but then we've also kind of broken it out so we have some labor here for multimodal and then some labor for fixed route as well. But it's the same, it's not additional to what's in our administrative budget. It's just the way we've allocated it across programs. We have about $850,000 in consulting fees for our active transportation corridor planning effort. And then this is a placeholder for a traffic and revenue or tolling feasibility study for the Yolo 80 managed lanes, along with some advisory and legal services for the Yolo 80 managed lanes. And then our TMA program, Yolo Commute, is also part of our new multimodal or mullet modal, as it says here, program. So those are included there as well. So overall, about a $1.5 million increase, $1.7 million increase in our budget, largely due again to this multimodal program that we see here. So that's a lot of talking from me. Let me stop and see kind of any questions that the committee has at this point.
So I have a question. This is Brent from Woodland. Multimodal operating expenses, so it looks like that's more project-based. Is that charged back to the cities either through YCTD admin or fixed routes, or that's charged
no.
to project?
That is all. This is all grant funded.
Okay.
The tolling and feasibility and traffic and revenue study, that's something that if it does happen, we may be tapping into some of our reserves for that, but everything else here is from the raise grant and the infra grant. Only the traffic and revenue study is not, and we're assuming that we would use some of our recovery funds that are not yet allocated, or some of our unrestricted reserve that we have for that.
I'm sorry, where's restricted? Is restricted reserve, is that LTF, ultimately LTF money, or where does that come from?
It's a good question. So this is a bit of the kind of the detective work that we've been doing to try to understand the way our accounting system. We're also transitioning to a new accounting system. The way our accounting has been done, we have not a ton of. We're still working to understand the money that we have in the bank, frankly, and where it's come from, and how much of it is LTF and how much of it is from other sources. Some of it is, funding that we've applied for that we've not yet spent down for various grants. So that's the picture that we're still putting together on the revenue side, which is why we don't have revenue information for you today.
Okay. Sorry, it's just a follow-up. So advisory and legal service for 80 managed lanes project. So is there a grant fund or how does that get paid for?
So we're still in negotiations with Caltrans and FHWA with regard to eligible uses for the $86 million infra fund. Our assumption is that that would be paid for. We currently have a small contract this year that came out of our existing budget for advisory and legal services. Going forward, our hope is once we have a signed agreement with FHWA and Caltrans, we'll be able to actually charge some of those to the infra grant.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess my overall concern is, a project on I-80 paid for by, Woodland LTF, or and maybe other jurisdictions have concerns about that too. So.
I mean, honestly, I'll say that, Brent, that like legally, I don't think that we can do that because LTF TDA funds are for transit. So it's my assumption that we can't use any of those for a project on 80.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm done.
No, thank you. Bob, I wasn't sure if your hand was still up from last time or if that's a new hand.
It's a new hand. That's okay. I was going to ask you a question early on, but some of my questions I think you've answered, but maybe I'll recap. So the administration operating expenses, the increase in the regular employees, that's in part due to some salary adjustments to marketplace or bottom of marketplace. Does it include net new positions?
There are no new positions envisioned for this year. There were a number of new positions that were envisioned in last year's budget that we've either just filled or are still open. But we're not creating any new positions this year.
Okay, and thank you. And then, I mean, I'm not worried about being nitpicky about any of this stuff, but I think perhaps when you bring back a complete budget draft, I know you'll do this for the board, but for our benefit, I know you talked about some of the, kind of change in, I'll call it budget presentation form. You've split some things out differently. And so anytime you do that, you're kind of making new estimates of sorts. But there were a number of line items that seem to have changed significantly. A couple of which you touched on, others you didn't. And I guess I'd be interested in understanding, were they conservative estimates before, or was there something unique going on? I'm looking at like technology support dropped by 150 grand. That's a significant change under your, I guess, admin operating expenses. And then your fixed route, you had $500,000 of new professional services, 189,000 of new utility costs, which were zero before. Just, when you get to it, I don't need an answer today. I just trying to understand what the changes are.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer any of those questions. I didn't want to kind of I wanted to let you guys lead as far as the amount of detail or where you wanted the detail, but I'm happy to share those. So on the technology support side, there's a couple things that were going on. We had, for whatever reason, under the prior administration, purchased a subscription for some very expensive run cutting software that we didn't actually end up using. I think it was something to the effect of $60,000 a year. And so we've canceled that subscription. And we also, for TripSpark, which is the technology that we use, it's some onboard technology for the Causeway connection. We had some one-time setup costs for that. And then we also had some, in terms of setting up our new website, we had some costs associated with the web upgrade. So the combination of those is why you see the reduction, because those are all kind of a couple of one-time projects that are now done, plus getting rid of that really expensive software subscription that we were not using. In terms of the fixed route operating expenses, the professional services, this is a result of the fact that we have a couple of policies, a number of like statutorily required policies, programs, plans that are out of date. Our short range transit plan is woefully out of date. Like I said, we don't have a 10-year capital improvement plan, and we don't have a future fuels plan, which is mandated by ARB that actually needs to be completed by 2024. That's planning how we're going to transition to zero emissions vehicles as required under state law. So those are three major plans that we have just are like, one doesn't exist and the other two are over 10 years old. And we have actually applied for some of those funds, some of those, there's funding that we've gotten for some of those for the short range transit plan and the future fuels plan through some discretionary competitive funds from Saycog that will help offset some of those. So I believe it's about $200,000 of that 500,000 is paid for from competitive funds. And the remainder of that, we think we'll be able to use some of our recovery funds, our one-time recovery funds to pay for the rest of that. So I'm glad you asked about that because it's a very large line item. And it's my hope that with the completion of these plans, we will actually be able to be current and in compliance with all of the required plans that we need to have in place. And then was there a third one you asked about?
Oh, I think the utilities on the same area, 189 grand from zero. Just
Yeah. This has to do with and maybe Jose can explain this better than I around how the utilities because we have electric vehicle charging, and then we have the utilities that we need particularly for powering our CNG, our compressed natural gas station. This was about kind of reorganizing the budget. So those costs haven't they're not new costs. They're just we're splitting them out differently. And Jose, do you want to add any?
I was just gonna say you phrased it the best way for now that we can do so. It's really just moving them into a more appropriate budget versus having it be lumped together and being a little more obfuscated. And so those details and information about those changes and how these line items get quote unquote rolled up into one another will be provided with the draft budget.
All right, well, thank you. I mean, I know until we can see the revenue side of it, it's hard to gauge the fundamental item comment that, you know, you'll be seeking to bump up everybody's share of LTF and SDA funds by a certain average percentage. So I'll wait and see what the revenue picture looks like. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. And Nick, you've been very patient.
Yeah, I had one question that on the multimodal or multimodal, however you want to call it. All those the funding there, I think, is that all coming from, and again, I know we don't have the revenues, but I'm curious, is that all coming from the RAISE grant? Is that what you're expecting to fund all these? And because none of these were in existence before, right?
Correct. Yes. So, the active transportation corridors planning is 850,000. That is the RAISE grant, and that's for the, again, for a reminder for everybody, it's for a countywide plan for for basically intercity bicycle and pedestrian connections, and then it's for basically construct, design, and engineering of 3 priority trail segments that would then position those for to go after like ATP funds for implementation. These other the direct charge labor, again, that's just an allocation from the overall administrative budget, but we do have grant funding from both RAISE and Infra that can help contribute to this. Actually, I take that back. I apologize. I should clarify. For the RAISE grant, we have a local match requirement for that. So the RAISE grant primarily funds the consulting efforts, but we break out this line item because it is considered a local match that we contributed to do that. So that is going to be coming from some of our general funding sources like LTF and TDA. And that's the new position that was created in last year's budget. That's Brian Abinat's position. For the lines 78 and 79 related to the managed lanes, the tolling feasibility traffic and revenue study, this is a one-time cost that would be required if we were to establish to make that a toll lane. We're in conversation with both Saycog and Caltrans about how that could be funded. So the total cost would be $400,000, but we're hopeful that that would be a shared cost that we could share with Saycog and Caltrans, were we to move forward with that. But we've put it here again conservatively. My expectation is that we would use some of our one-time recovery funds or some of the carry forward / kind of unrestricted net reserve revenue that we have to pay for that. And for the line 79, the advisory and legal services, again, I'm hoping that we can charge this to the infra grant, but we have not yet finalized our agreement with FHWA and Caltrans with regard to what YCTD costs are eligible. But that is the plan for those. And then the $15,000 on line 80, this is our TMA Yolo commute. This is a program actually that is longstanding, but it was kind of, I think, buried in our fixed route budget in years past. So this is something the TMA does bring its own source of funding through its membership base. So we receive revenues from member organizations, and then those are used to provide these incentives for people to, walk, bike, take transit, et cetera.
Thank you. That's my question.
So,
I know we're at 2:28. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, a couple things.
Yeah.
I thought you just said as you were going over those direct charge labor, you said need to be paid by LTF.
Yeah, so I realize I misspoke when I said this is funded by RAISE. It's not funded by RAISE. It's a local match that was in the RAISE application. So that would be funded. So this is a new YCTD staff position that was approved in last year's budget, this multimodal planner position. And that would be funded by local revenue as a local match. So whether that could be a combination of STA, LTF, 5307, the other just the sources that we have. And so it's not necessarily going to LTF, but it would be going to locally controlled revenue, which is any one of those sources. It's part of our overall kind of core budget.
Okay. Are those funds, I thought LTF had other, well, depending on whether it's LTF or STA, are we allowed to use it that way?
We are allowed to use STA funds. So LTF and STA funds can be used for administrative costs. They could not be used for consultants. But if we're just talking about line 76, which is our labor, so to the extent YCTD labor costs are an eligible use of those funds. We could not use those. Earlier, you were asking about these two lines. These would not be eligible uses of LTF or TDA.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I don't know if this, we could probably talk about this another time too, but I did not notice in your budget line item, which is, well, I guess it's on page 11, has the revenue stuff.
Yeah, we can go to that now if you'd like.
13 of the PDF. So that breaks out both YCTD admin and fixed route, where I think previously, kind of historically 2 or 3 years ago, fixed route was kind of the one line item that was mentioned. So it looks like you've broken out fixed route and YCTD admin, although I'm not sure if that was the case last year and I just didn't notice it.
It was the case last year. Sorry. As my understanding is that the board asked for that we quit hiding the administrative costs and separate them out. Yeah. Is that right, Jose? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my only, concern or comment was just what's the basis. I think there were comments of if one entity reduces or adds transit service, that there's a admin cost that's kind of fixed based on a certain point in time. Looks like Davis has about 100,000 more, West Sac. Anyways, Davis and West Sac around 900. We're in the low 800,000s in Woodland. Anyways, I don't want to, bring up past history because it sounded like that was probably the last thing Terry did before he left. But is YCT admin, is that fixed? Is that like a fixed percentage, or does that change in terms of? Because it looks like that increased for everybody 57.2%, or at least Davis, Woodland, West Sac. So looks like those, whatever the percentages established last year, we're just sticking with those percentages.
So that's right. In
And the
terms of how that's correct. The way we did not mess with how it was allocated amongst jurisdictions. We just, we just stuck with that. I mean, and that's something that it seemed like there has, from my understandings, there's been some long and involved torturous conversations about that. So we just said, let's not change that at all. The reason you see it going up so high on the admin is last year, and it's this line here. Last year, we relied on $2.6 million of carry forward funds in order to balance the budget, the bulk of which was about 1.5 million for admin. And so what we've done is we've basically, those are one, carry forward budget is, carry forward funds are not sustainable, right? And so what we've done is essentially taken the LTF increase and replaced those dollars that were in the admin budget that were funded by carry forward and replaced those with that increase in LTF. So your question, we kind of hadn't really gotten to this piece yet, but your question, I'll just sort of jump in and just give the high level. So the LTF allocations for Yolo County or TDA allocations overall have increased about 20% and it's lowest for Yolo County, it's about 10%. And then it's about 22%, almost 22% for Woodland. So what we did in terms of this year's allocation is we essentially, it's a rising tide that's lifting all boats. We essentially, we split that increase equally between YCTD and its member jurisdictions, so that everybody's essentially getting the same. We're getting the same increase that you are, and what that allows us to do again is not rely on carry forward funds, which are not sustainable, for our administrative budget going forward. And just to remind everybody, because I always need to be reminded, STA funds only go to transportation planning and mass transportation. We receive those directly. And then the LTF funds, where they're meant to improve existing public transportation services. And then there's a regional coordination piece, which is Saycog's share of it. But then in counties where the population was under 500,000 in 1970, which includes Yolo County, any LTF that's not used for transit may be used for local streets and roads, construction and maintenance. And so it's the LTF funding. So the STA goes to YCD directly, kind of regardless. And the LTF is where it can be divided between YCTD and our member jurisdictions. So I know we're out of time, but I am happy to keep going. I know this is a really important piece of the conversation, and want to answer any questions or hear any kind of comments that you have at this point. Again, there'll be a formal review period as well, but if there's concerns about this approach, would love to hear those before we, bring this back to you as a full draft. Yeah, Nick.
Yeah, I've just got a question because I'm not as familiar with LTF funds and how they rise and fall like I am with gas tax. But I mean, no estimates have come out, but I'm anticipating a reduction in revenues there because of the high prices. The number of gasoline, gallons of gasoline typically is reduced, and so I'm considering a reduction in our HUDA. So and trying to anticipate that. So I was just wondering, I'm not sure if that's appropriate here, but I just thought I'd ask the question.
Yeah, and I'm not as familiar. That's the gas tax share that local jurisdictions receive directly under SB1. Is that right?
Well, no, it's not connected to SB1. HUDA, Who User Taxes, is the long-standing gas tax that's been in place since I think the 70s. But it's the 17 cents a gallon, right? So, and it's fixed, and depending upon how many gallons are purchased, that 17 cents is taken off the top. So
yeah, I apologize that I'm not as familiar with that and haven't been tracking that as closely. But yeah, I'd be curious if others have and have a sense of that, of how big of a decline we're assuming there's going to be a decline.
Well, nobody's really come out with any estimates at this point in time, I think, but given you know, looking back in 2008, when, you know, I believe the gas prices rose, and there was just there was a shortage, you know, shortfalls all around because the number of gallons of gasoline was reduced. And so I was just wondering, I mean, you're budgeting, it looks like you're anticipating increases across the board. I mean, you know, and so I was just wondering if there was any consideration of that and how that worked in.
Yeah, well, I mean, the STA, you know, is a tax on diesel fuel. And the STA is up quite a bit, you know, this top line, you know, so for STA for Davis is up 29.9%, 33% for Woodland, West Sacramento 32, et cetera. So I don't know how that will correspond, if that tells us anything about what's going to happen to gas tax, whereas the LTF is the sales tax, right? So so I don't, you know, my understanding is that we don't receive, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that we don't receive any of the ARHUDA or the gas taxes directly. That it's really just the diesel tax, the diesel fuel and the general sales tax that we receive in terms of state, as far as state transportation funding sources go.
Yeah, I just comment that, I mean, if I'm getting at the gist of Nick's question, I mean, sounds like he's planning on perhaps a more restrained or conservative revenue assumption, and just asking YCTD to check whoever you rely on for your revenue projections to see if that's something that's you should factor in. I mean, every jurisdiction or agency needs to make that decision themselves. So I don't know who YCTD relies on for that advice, or you just take the DOF or, you know, info from the state on.
Well, this
rev-
info comes from Saycog. And so it's, and this is, at this point, I believe this is a done deal. The board just approved it. The Saycog board just approved it in March.
Well, I
I
don't
could
think
be
this
wrong.
is a Saycog revenue. This is a state revenue. Saycog's probably just mirroring what the Department of Finance at the state is estimating or something, is my sense. So anyhow, we don't need to belabor it now. It just raises the general budgeting issue of conservative nature of uncertain revenue projections. That's all. And all I can say, Nick, in past years where YCTD has had some unrealized revenue streams forecasted, the board usually works fairly hard to not ask for more money from the cities and the counties, but to figure out how to reduce their expenses if need be, has been past general practice. So
That's good to know. Yeah, like I say, you all have more institutional memory of this than I do. So you know, please feel free if you feel like if I'm missing anything here, let me know. Other questions or comments at this point? Okay, well, hearing none, again, you know, we still have a fair bit of work to do, but we will make sure that we get you I think, or tentatively, I think our date we're targeting right now is April 13th. We're still, again, trying to get some information like from the federal government about our 5307 and 5311 funding allocations, as well, trying to, again, better understand the funds that we have in the bank and the recovery funds that we are eligible for, and understand where the restrictions are and how we can use those to fund some of these pieces. But I mean, I will say, you know, to the concerns about, you know, funding anything related to the Yolo 80 managed lanes project using LTF or TDA funds, that's absolutely not our intent. Our hope is that we can find ways to do that work and to fund that work. But you know, again, the budget is just a budget, and we're not going to do it if we don't have the revenue to meet it. So the next iteration of this will include the revenue side, and we'll make sure we have ample opportunity for you all to review it. And, you know, and if there is a desire to have another meeting of this TAC, again, the board's not going to take action on the budget until their June meeting. So we have some time, and happy to, you know, to schedule another meeting if it's the committee's desire to talk it through once there's a complete draft. So with that, I'll just thank everyone for your time and appreciate you, making the time for this committee. I know you all have a lot on your plate, and we will be in touch very soon. And we'll make sure we get the next regularly scheduled meeting, the June meeting, on your calendars.
Thanks, Autumn.
Thanks, everyone.
Right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.